going to line this one up to you. Amalgamation of Grant Valiant. that was a tricky one there. Angry Boiler fan on Twitter and Thomas Bowner also on Twitter. All three of these are from Twitter. How do you see Painter dividing up at the 3 and 4 spots? What do you think will be the biggest factor to who starts and who gets heavy minutes at those 2 spots? Seems like Purdue has 7 guys who could start at those 2 spots.
Yeah, and this was probably our most popular question. We had 5 or 6 different questions that kind of touched on this, but those 3 people really emphasized the 3 spot or the 4 spot and how's time going to get divided up and what's gonna be the deciding factor about how that time gets divided up. So I'm going to answer about the 3 spot, and then I'm going to kick it to Joe for the 4. I mean, primarily just because Joe's taller and I feel like he should know post play better than me. But I think the 3 spot's really interesting because coming into the year, we were all thinking like, how are they going to divide up time between the 4 and the 5, the 4 and the 5? And then we started seeing stuff in the spring practices coming out of that, and then summer, and then the Europe trip. And it's like, oh, the 3 spot is going to be a battle this year in terms of who gets time. And I think the interesting thing to me is, as much as any other spot on the floor this particular year, I think the 3 spot may have as much to do with what is happening at every other position on the floor. And what I mean by that is if Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer are shooting the 3 ball at an extremely high level and providing points, and TKR is playing a bunch of minutes besides Zach Edey, and they're giving you 35 points a game, you're not so worried about producing offense from that 3 spot. You're worried about protecting Fletcher Lawyer and Braden Smith defensively. And if that's the case, that lends itself to Ethan Morton as being a really experienced person. Painter talks a lot about trust. And what he means by that is, can I trust you to be in the correct spot on defense all the time? Can I trust you to make the right read and the right pass on offense all the time? I got a fly landing on me all the time. And Ethan Morton is probably the person he has the most trust in terms of an experience standpoint. Now, if you say, well, you know, Brian Waddell's shown a lot of flashpoints this spring, this summer, and in Europe, he's maybe a little bit of combination of that. He's been around the program for 3 years. He's got some 2 years. He's got some offensive skills. Well, going into his 3rd year, right? Right, Joe? Yep. Going into his 3rd year. Has some probably more offensive weaponry than what Morton does. He's got the length to play pretty good defense from that spot, and he's got some experience there. On the other hand, if we're saying Painter's talked a lot this year about, hey, I should have recognized at some point that we just needed more offensive output. That's his big push behind TKR having more minutes this year that he's referenced multiple times. At some point, you know, if I put my best offensive players out there, maybe we just outscore FDU and don't worry about that, what our defense looks like, you know? So if that's the case, if we're not getting enough offensive output, then you start thinking, well, you know, Myles Colvin can play the 3, and Myles Colvin's probably got the prettiest shot of anybody on this team. He's got a heck of a jab step, 15, 18-foot pull-up. Probably provides more offensive punch, somewhat in a way like Carson freshman year of like, can I just get a heater off the bench to give me an offensive punch? So I think a lot of the 3 spot is going to play out by what is happening everywhere else. If we need offensive punch, I see that leaning more towards Colvin or Waddell minutes. If we don't, and we're getting the offensive punch from everywhere else, I see that leaning more towards Morton minutes, staying kind of more similar to what they are. And Cam's kind of a wild card. He's a leaper. He's a rim runner. He can play defense. He did all the dirty work on that Europe trip, but I just don't. There's a piece. I love Cam's game, and I talked him up really high all spring. Don't forget him. But this spot is so loaded with talent. I'm worried he's going to be the guy as the rotation gets kind of narrowed down towards the end of the year that may just because of a multitude of things may start to lose minutes in that spot.
So before Joe heads over to the 4 spot, you know, I hate IU kind of is jumping in here, but I just want to get his question. And he said, with so much depth, I worry that we will try and play everyone a little bit. Do you think we need to stick with a small roster so a few people can get comfortable?
Well, Painter's narrowed that roster up as we get into January every year. So I think November and December, he's going to try all 4 of those guys at different times. And I think he's going to figure out who's working and see what those guys can provide at different times.
I mean, don't you think that that'll be more so in the first 2 weeks? I mean, their schedule is loaded here.
But
tinkering with lineups against some of the gauntlet like they have in Maui.
I still think he's going to try. It was January before we really saw Waddell not getting any minutes last year. In those really good games, I think obviously we may not see it quite as much, and he may lean on what he's more comfortable with. But there's still a decent amount of games in there against what should, quote, be lesser opponents that I think he's going to be able to try to figure some things out.
All right, take it away, Joe. Head on over to the 4.
Yeah, so I've started to switch my thinking about the 4. I will start, I guess, by saying just like TKR seems like the dude. Like it's just that's what all the signs are pointing to. If he's not starting at the 4, he's going to take minutes there. But I switched my thinking from like, okay, who plays the 4 to how do these front court pairings work? You're going to get 30 minutes of Edey. We know that. All 3 other big options, TKR, Furst, Gillis, can play alongside Edey. Like that's going to happen. And so it's less of like who plays the 4 and just who plays the best alongside Edey, if that makes sense. Because then when Edey's off the floor for about the 10 minutes, we'll say a game roughly. Like when TKR and Furst are in, I don't really care who's the 4, quote unquote. Like they showed it in the offseason, the summer tour. I think Furst like defensively is the 5, but I think TKR is going to be more of the 5 offensively. Like TKR is going to be the one that gets the post touches. He's going to get stuff run through him. Furst is going to now be able to be this. I mean, he kind of was it last year, just in a limited sample. Like he's super athletic. He can be this guy that can cut to the rim, hoping that the 3-point shot comes back. Like if he can be a guy that is at least respectable from 3 and then can also cut and get to the rim, rebounds really well. I think that's going to be interesting. I think in terms of like pure minutes, and I think we'll have more of a minutes breakdown in one of the later questions. Like Gillis, just as I keep thinking through it, like Gillis is the one that sort of gets squeezed for me, just because he's the only one that can, like, he only plays the 4. He's the only one that, like, aside from Edey, I guess, but out of TKR, Furst, Gillis is the only one that can only play the 4. And even then, like, I don't think you really want a Gillis Furst backcourt, just with the way that Purdue runs offense in that. If that happens, then that means there's something positive at the guard spots because you're trusting him that much. So it just kind of takes more of his chances away. Now he has to play with only Edey and TKR. So that's kind of my thoughts, is just like what front court pairings work together. It seems like Edey, TKR is going to get the first crack at it. And then that's going to be fun for when it kind of gets staggered. Maybe Gillis comes in early for TKR, and now TKR comes in for Edey or something like that. And now Furst is in with TKR. I'm excited for that pairing a lot, but that's kind of just my overall thoughts on it. It's just like, I think it's even just in the Big Ten in general, IU, Michigan are the 2 teams that come to mind. Like there's talk of, okay, there's all these 4s and stuff. It's like, yes, It's not as much in my mind now of can they play the 3 or the 4. It's can they just fit together?